Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into this really high-stakes trade fight. It's kind of defined by one single, pretty amazing number.
Which number is that?
The U.S. Commerce Secretary pointed out that India, 1.4 billion people, huge growing economy.
Right, massive.
And yet they import, and I quote, not a single bushel of U.S. corn. Zero.
Wow. Zero. That tells you right away this isn't just about, like, tariffs or something simple.
Exactly. It's a structural clash.
And what's really interesting is that zero, it doesn't mean that India doesn't need corn. It absolutely does.
Uh-huh.
But there's this wall. It's built from, well, a mix of things.
Mm-hmm.
Genetics, economics, and some really intense domestic politics.
Okay.
So our mission really is to figure out why the world's biggest corn exporter, the U.S., just cannot get into one of the world's biggest potential markets.
Right. Let's unpack that because India does have this growing need for maize. They're balancing, food needs, but also this huge push for ethanol blending.
Yeah, the ethanol program is big.
Needs like 10 to 12 million tons of maize just this season. Now, they claim they expect a bounty crop and won't need imports this year.
Okay, but hold on. If they're expecting a bounty, maybe 50 million tons, why are their overall maize imports actually way up?
Exactly. That's the contradiction.
Like 8 times higher in 2024-25, reaching 1 million tons. That doesn't quite add up if they have plenty.
It doesn't. And the key is where they're importing from. They are importing but actively avoiding the U.S., getting like 60% from Myanmar.
Myanmar, okay.
And the rest, Ukraine, mostly, which just confirms they don't want the U.S. stuff.
And that points straight to the big barrier, doesn't it? The GM issue.
Genetically modified corn.
Yeah. The vast majority of U.S. corn is GM. And India is super strict. They only allow GM cultivation for cotton, nothing else.
So importing GM corn, it's just politically toxic.
Politically and technically, yeah.
Yeah.
There's this huge fear, widespread fear that it'll get into the human food chain, whether the claims about, alleged toxicity are true or not. The fear is real.
That's the GM wall you mentioned.
That's the wall.
Okay, so India's actively avoiding U.S. corn because it's GM. But why is the U.S. pushing so hard? Why this specific product into India?
Well, to get that, you really have to contrast the two agricultural systems. They're fundamentally different.
How so?
India's system is, mass-based. It's historically focused on basic nutrition, feeding everyone, getting rid of hunger.
Okay, and the U.S.?
The U.S. system, it's essentially capitalist agriculture, purely. We're talking huge farms, right? Often 500 acres or more for just one operation.
Wow.
Highly mechanized, super high productivity. Their corn yield is like 3 times India's.
And that kind of system, that capitalist system, it leads to overproduction, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They have to export massive amounts, something like 45 million tons of corn every year.
So where does it all go domestically?
Domestically, it feeds huge industries, high fructose corn syrup, HFCS, plastics even, and tons of animal feed for those big CFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations.
Right.
But even with all that, they've got this surplus. They desperately need new markets. And India's ethanol program, that looks like a massive, really tempting target.
And you mentioned politics before. How does that play?
Oh, it's huge. Why is the Commerce Secretary making noise about this? It's not just trade policy. Think about U.S. politics.
The Farm Belt?
Exactly. The Corn Belt is Republican heartland. The lobbying power there is immense. And remember, the whole U.S. election cycle basically kicks off with the primaries in Iowa.
A huge corn and soy state.
The key corn-soy state. Plus, you had China cutting back on soybean imports from the U.S. recently. That just ramped up the pressure massively to find other big markets, like India.
So the U.S. sees this huge potential market opening up with ethanol, driven partly by political needs at home. But India looks at the U.S. push and sees, what? A threat.
A massive structural threat. And there's a cautionary tale they look at very closely. Mexico.
Ah, NAFTA.
Yes. After NAFTA started in the 90s, you had this flood of cheap U.S. corn going into Mexico.
Yeah, and what happened?
It devastated local farmers. Over 1 million Mexican farmers were driven out of business.
Wow. 1 million.
Yeah. So India is terrified of something similar. Especially because, get this, U.S. corn prices are already only about 70% of Indian maize prices.
Which suggests a huge risk of dumping, right?
Yeah.
Flooding the market with cheap imports.
Exactly. A severe risk. And that potential dumping wouldn't just hurt farmers financially.
It would destroy the whole system.
It could destroy the domestic maize ecosystem they've built up, including, hitting new farmers in really sensitive areas like Bihar, which often has important elections.
Right.
And maybe more importantly, importing cheap feedstock for ethanol completely defeats the main point of the ethanol program itself.
Which is import substitution. Can you clarify that? If the goal is to stop importing foreign oil, why is importing foreign corn such a problem?
Because the whole idea is to save foreign exchange, right? To potentially stop maybe $10 billion of Forex outgo every year by substituting foreign oil with domestically produced ethanol.
Ah, I see.
If you just start importing the corn to make the ethanol, you're just swapping one dependency foreign oil for another dependency foreign feedstock. It defeats the whole substitution goal.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what this means for you listening is that this trade dispute, it's really less about simple market access or tariffs.
Yeah, it's much deeper.
It's more about India using these GM standards maybe as a tool to protect its entire domestic farming system, its farmers, and its political stability.
From the pressures of this very different, very powerful U.S. model of capitalist agriculture.
Right. Which leads us to a final thought for you to consider.
Yeah, think about this. U.S. farming policy, historically, it's needed huge domestic exports just to function, right? Things like school lunch programs absorbing surplus, massive subsidies, countercyclical payments.
Just to keep the system afloat.
Exactly. So given that internal need, how fundamentally does the U.S.'s systemic need to export its surplus corn actually shape the global food system? Maybe in ways that go far beyond what we usually think of as just simple free market trade.